Transportation is becoming one of the most intelligent, connected, and economically dynamic systems in the modern world, and the companies that understand this shift will shape what comes next. In this episode, Joe George from Cox Automotive breaks down a much bigger transformation happening inside this market. It is transportation moving from vehicle ownership to the economics of miles traveled. We also get into autonomy, AI, fleet optimization, and hidden transportation costs. This wasn't a hype conversation, it was a systems conversation, and hopefully it provokes thoughts about the evolution of our transportation ecosystem. Let's get into it. Welcome to another episode of Field Frequency, powered by Field Advantage. Field Advantage is an IT field services company specializing in the maintenance and operation of critical infrastructure, including EV charging networks. Today, I'm happy to have Joe George, President of Mobility for Cox Automotive. Joe, thanks for coming on Field Frequency.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, a little background for the audience. Recently, Joe and I were at an event by the Transportation Energy Institute, where Joe was presenting there, and found his presentation insightful and kind of thought-provoking. He did really good at that TEI event. And of course, Field Advantage is certainly friends of TEI. And we have John Eichberger coming up on the coming up on the show pretty soon. But I'm glad that Joe was able to connect with Joe at that event, and wanted to get Joe on the show to kind of lay out some things and what Cox Automotive is doing in the e-mobility space. But Joe, as we get kicked off here, I'd like to start off with your background, what led you into the automotive and transportation industry. If you could just share your background, and then following your background, tell us about what Cox Automotive is doing in the e-mobility space.
Sure. Well, thanks again for having us. It's great to be here. I'm third generation car business. My grandfather was a car dealer. My dad was a car dealer. My mom and dad were together in a business, and all my uncles and pretty much my whole family. So I grew up around car dealerships and in and around the transportation industry, which led me to my now 36-year career with Cox Enterprises, all in the automotive space, from Manheim to Auto Trader to our retail solutions businesses, and then eventually to mobility. And mobility for us is, we are Cox Automotive is focused on helping car buying, so Auto Trader, Kelley Blue Book.
Mm-hmm.
We help drive consumers to the right vehicle through our dealers, who are our main customer. That's who pays our bills. So we provide the software that operates their dealerships, and this is where they come to buy and sell inventory at our auctions business. And so when we looked at the future of transportation and mobility, we felt like there was some change on the horizon.
Mm-hmm.
And the Cox Enterprises is a 128-year-old family-owned company in Atlanta, Georgia. So it's been through a lot of decades of growth and innovation. And so we think about the world in decades, not quarters. And we saw this, this opportunity for the revolution in vehicle technology and the revolution in the economics of transportation, mostly driven by digital commerce. So think Amazon, and then how people move from point A to point B, which started out Uber and Lyft, and now it's Waymo. And so you're starting to see autonomy sneak into that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we built our business around the premise that we're going to help these emerging fleets maintain their uptime, regardless whether they're autonomous, electric, whatever form factor they take. We want to be ready for. Well, we want to be ready for this next evolution in the industry. And what's driving it on our side is, on the car buying side, is the cost of vehicles is getting very, very expensive for most families.
Mm-hmm.
This gives us a ability to support the thing that's going to help families manage their budgets better as they use digital commerce and as they use delivery to obtain their products that they need.
Yeah, I concur on the ever increasing costs of automobile ownership. We recently had John Volker, contributing editor of Car and Driver magazine, and he was talking even about car loans. So not only the cost of vehicles going up, loans being extended out 7, 8, 9 years. So that's making it even more expensive when you you factor in financing. But, from kind of through the lens of where the market sits and the evolution of our industry, specifically with the change from traditionally powered vehicles, gasoline, diesel, to now electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles, a lot of the conversation is always on the identity of the vehicle and what its feature set is. But from your vantage point, I'm curious where the industry is fundamentally misframing things right now. Where is the industry getting it wrong, you might say, as we're shifting to emerging technologies?
I think the traditional manufacturers are kind of missing the full story of the next generation of vehicles where, you know, is the electric vehicle, is it all about electrification? But a lot of what's in these new freeform OEMs like a Tesla and a Rivian
Hmm.
is a completely different consumer
Hmm.
experience driven by the in-vehicle capabilities and the ability to download different experiences over time. Really, the vehicle you purchased at the beginning isn't the vehicle you're driving. It's been updated
Hmm.
multiple times, and I think they happen to be electric
Hmm.
vehicles, but they're also a new operating system, and it's kind of the next degree of or next vista of transportation. And I think to stay fixated on whether it's electric or internal combustion engine, I think that's the wrong. I think that
When you step back from the vehicle, and this question kind of goes back to the presentation at the recent TEI conference, specifically transportation as a system. If you step back from the vehicle, what is the right way to think about transportation as a system? And then you could answer that question through the lens of the fleet operator, or even at the consumer level. What's the actual unit of value operators should be optimizing for as it relates to the transportation system at kind of macro level?
yeah, I think ultimately, and the premise of the presentation at TEI was, if you think about the future of transportation, transportation is, a million different use cases that
Mhm,
companies have, we as consumers have, and then transportation satisfies those use cases.
mhm,
And so today, the way the market, back from when Henry Ford started selling Model Ts, the consumer purchases the vehicle, they finance the vehicle, we finance the vehicle, we have to provide the insurance, we have to maintain it, we have to fuel it, we have all those expenses, and plus we take the depreciation on the asset. And so when you step back at the value proposition of an American family, that's not a real great financial
mm,
transaction for most families. They pay a lot in interest. So when you take that cost and you divide it by the number of miles they consume, you get a cost per mile. And that's really where I think as the future comes down, people are going to have to look at that more and more is, how do I get that tube of toothpaste to my house?
mhm.
Do I drive and buy a whole basket cart of goods and then drive home? Do I let Amazon deliver it? For the vast majority of Americans, they're going to start having to make these decisions. So that's on the consumer side. On the fleet side, it's the same, which is total cost of operation,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
And to be competitive in a really competitive goods economy, I would say service economy,
mhm.
you're going to have to be always optimizing your expense profile, your efficiency, and fleet is an important part of how goods get to market. Toothpaste goes through a supply chain that has a lot of trucking involved with it, a lot of delivery aspects, warehousing. One of the significant costs in the economy is fleet operations. And so, how do you optimize your total cost of operation? And that's a whole concatenate different things that you monitor. I think cost per mile, ultimately, the most efficient and effective cost per mile for the particular use cases that consumers and businesses have. We're going to get into a world where we're always looking to optimize that. And I think the models of ownership and the models of fleet operations are going to evolve, especially with autonomy coming, because it's like, who owns the autonomous vehicle? Does Google Waymo own it? Does Uber own it? Do consumers own it? Do you like subscribe to BMW and whatever autonomous vehicle form factor you need for that day shows up? So there's a lot of really cool, we can go on and on forever about the ways this could go. But to answer your specific question, total cost operation. And for consumers, the awareness that, you know, my car that I finance and fuel and maintain and to take the depreciation sits idle 92% of the
Yep,
time. So it's like,
yep,
it's just a terrible investment profile. But it's like, listen, if I've got a sick child at 3 o'clock in the morning, I can get up and go to the hospital too. So
yeah.
anyway, total cost operation, looking at the world more through miles, cost per mile than necessarily how it's in, because digital commerce has opened up all kinds of doors for particularly shopping. You can take a different.
Yeah, you highlight a very key statistic around the lifespan of the vehicle. 92% of its lifespan spent parked somewhere, with the balance 8%. And to your point of the depreciation that we have to take, the cost, the interest rates attached to the financing of the loan, the cost of insurance, the cost of fuel, all of that, those are that total cost of ownership. It gets out there both for the fleet and the consumer alike when you think about it. And
Yeah.
convenience is shifted a lot of transportation costs out of the consumer's line of sight. And when I make that statement, I'm thinking like Waymo, as an example. And then, of course, last week I took my first ride in a Zeus, in Las
Yep.
Vegas, and so that was
That's Amazon.
the Zeus. That's who owns that. I didn't realize that. Yeah, that was my first ride with that autonomous brand.
Just so your audience knows, my grandfather's rolling over in his grave for me, even saying anything remotely negative about the
Sure.
car ownership and car buying. So, but I have been around a long time, and you know, I don't see how we don't evolve. We don't evolve because the cost of cars getting so expensive. Most average F-150 now, I think, $68,000. I mean, you gotta, plumbers, you gotta do a lot of plumbing to pay for the.
Yeah.
The median income in the U.S. is $62,000.
Yeah, it just doesn't add up when you look at it. So as transportation, of course, is shifting, some of those costs that we were talking about, they kind of get taken out of the line of sight to the consumer. They don't understand. So, like, I'm thinking the autonomous vehicle.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about charging infrastructure. Where are those costs going to be sitting, and who's going to be carrying them tomorrow? What are your thoughts around
Yeah,
that?
that's a really, really good question, and I don't I have an
Sure,
opinion,
opinion's great.
but it will probably be wrong, and I know it'll be wrong. But I don't think Google got into Waymo to get in the automobile business,
Mm,
right?
mhm,
I don't think they woke up one day and say, "Hey, we want to be in the transportation," but they're in the data business, and so when you think about the amount of data that have been gathering around people's use cases and patterns, life patterns, and um, and what's neat about this whole concept of autonomous fleets is, when I taught my son how to drive, we went around in the high school parking lot and then I got a permit and then he started driving. These Waymo autonomous vehicles, every day they upload all their information to Google and they process it and then they push it all back down. So collectively the fleet gets smarter as an aggregated fleet.
mhm,
And so these cars and vehicles are just going to get smarter and smarter. And so, it's not just the vehicle data that's getting pushed up, but it's also where did Joe go when he uses us? How does he use us? Where does he use us? And anything about, so who pays for the mile? Joe may pay for part of it, but if I'm going to Hartsfield Airport, maybe Delta pays part of it. I don't know, but and you start to get it more interesting for people have different value of the miles that a vehicle's traveled. Walmart knows that I spend more in store than I do online,
mhm,
then they would certainly be glad to send an autonomous vehicle to pick me up and bring me into the store and pay for those miles on my behalf. And I think that's where we'll start to see the evolution.
mhm,
And it's not gonna, like, one day we're gonna wake up and all cars are gonna be autonomous. That's just not how it's gonna happen.
mhm,
And that's not how we transition from horse and buggy to automobiles either. On the charging side, I'm not as vexed by that. I think free market will catch up with it. And I think data centers are going to push it because we need the power to fuel those. And so we'll start to see more cooperative natures around getting more power into the grid. I also think that the profile of the charging of an electric vehicle is not as significant as I think a lot of the pundits say. And then finally, I think the evolution of hybrids are going to allow for low horsepower engines that do the charging for you while you're driving it. And so, but they have a much different carbon profile than building the huge power plants. And so I think there's just going to be this uneven evolution, that'll solve the power problem. Who pays for the charging? Again, it matters. Am I trying to attract Joe and his wife as a consumer? Do restaurants pay for our ride because they want us to come in and, you know,
mhm,
frequent their restaurant?
mhm.
A lot of cool things are going to happen in the future.
Yeah, agree, and all good comments. Going back to your comments around retail leveraging autonomous vehicle to direct business to them, bring business to them, stepping out of that and looking at even the Tesla model. So you of course have the Grok integration and you have the navigation system all connected together. So you get in your vehicle and the navigation is maybe got some prompts where it could send you, and that could be retail or food and beverage or whatever it may be. But then also when you punch into that navigation system, there's a hungry option. And when you click on that, it's going to list businesses. And
Yeah.
you can ask Grok, hey, I'm trying to get to Best Buy before they close, but I also need to make this other stop. And the route optimization behind that whole experience. And well, you should probably go to
Yeah.
Best Buy first, and or back to the point of the hungry, and it's going to list all the food and beverage locations. And so as the transportation systems are becoming more connected, there's a call to the retailer. And so I'm curious what your comments or thoughts are around concentrating that value. Who's going to win in that, and who's going to shudder in that whole.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I mentioned before we got on the air that you asked me some really good questions, and this is my opinion. You really made me think. And so I have to go back to really a bad answer to the question. And that is like I think those retailers, those entertainment products that engage and embrace new economic models for client driving better client experience,
Mhm,
more value to the client, to the consumers,
mhm.
will be successful. And then there'll be a group that just won't do it.
Yeah.
And I don't know who they are. I imagine Amazon has to be thinking about how to optimize not delivering one tube of toothpaste to the George household, because that's a really expensive tube of toothpaste. And so how do they orchestrate? Because they know enough about our purchasing patterns. And so how do they orchestrate better bundling for us? And I think AI is going to have a huge step in that. So the value, I think, ultimately the consumer will pay, we as consumers, in some indirect fashion, but it'll either make our lives easier. Time is our most precious commodity, or it'll help us save money and let us do more with the money we make. It's really whoever can connect those dots as seamlessly as possible I think are gonna be the winners.
Yeah. Yeah, you can get off into a whole conversation about, who owns the customer. And the reason why I make that comment is about to my earlier point of hitting the hungry feature on the Tesla navigation system. As a retailer, it seemed like you would be wanting to compete, kind of like in search engine optimization. You want to be at the top of the list. You want to be on page one of Google search results. Same thing in the vehicle system, all the navigation systems, Tesla or otherwise. You'd want to be, as a retailer, at the top of that list because you want people setting your location as the destination that they're headed to. And so how all that comes together, it's very much akin to who owns the customer, who owns the data, and how is it shared, and how is this ecosystem working together. I think of retailers, fuel retailers, who open up parking spaces and allow easement to CPOs to come on site and operate their charging network on location. The EV driver is coming to Circle K. The EV driver is coming to 7-Eleven, or rather, other retailers that have partnered with CPOs, Sheetz, Wawa, et cetera. Who owns that customer? Who owns their arrival? Is there conversion? Is there not conversion? They pulled up and charged. Did they go in the store? All of those points. And so transportation as a system, it's when it works, nobody notices. When it fails,
Right.
everybody
Right.
notices.
Everybody notices. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd like to hear your comments on how operators should think about that reliability and uptime, or maybe think about visibility as a strategic lever rather
It
than.
goes back to total cost of ownership, and one of the components of that is clearly maintenance and repair.
Mm,
But one of the most significant value detractors from a total cost of ownership for a fleet is downtime, right?
mhm,
So if a dump truck's not hauling dirt,
mhm,
it's not making money. So if it sits for a week, just take however much revenue it would have achieved during that week, and that's your downtime. Repair or preventative maintenance you could have or should have done to avert that week downtime, there's a massive ROI on that. And I think so. Back to your point about visibility, the tools are getting better for fleets and really for us as consumers to understand how our vehicle truck is feeling, and and what it needs. And we as an industry need to give better preventative maintenance insights to the driver, to the fleet owner, so that they can make better decisions. Because when when a fleet vehicle's down, it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing, and that costs money.
Yep.
And if you have enough of that, then not only do you have disappointed consumers maybe on one side, but you also have just lost revenue from the business. And I think that, I always say follow the dollar.
Hmm.
If you follow the dollar, that's where the fleets are going to get better and better.
Yeah.
But they need, an artificial intelligence, the AI capabilities are going to help that because we can process more data more quickly and present it in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. In a way that is actionable and meaningful. Like you say, I even think about the consumer aspect of it, where it's time for the oil change, to your point about preventative maintenance. Time for your oil to be changed. And so, especially if your vehicle's under warranty, you want to keep that preventative maintenance schedule. You want to go get the oil change. But I think about what is it, the ECU that detected it was time for the oil change also interfaces with the navigation or the operating screen inside the vehicle and
Right.
says, "Hey, it's time for an oil change. Jiffy Lube has a special right now. You should
Right
consider
now.
headed over there right now and take care
Yeah.
of two important things: save you some money on the oil change and also maintain your warranty on your vehicle." And so think that's at the consumer level. But to your point of the AI and fleets leveraging large data sets and actioning on them in meaningful ways to drive down that total cost of ownership within their fleet.
I don't think it's too long before we'll get into a autonomous taxi, whoever owns it, and you can pay different levels. It's just like streaming services. You can pay for ads, or you can pay for not having ads.
Hmm.
And so think about a world where you get in, you recognize they know Joe, they know what his interests are, they know what his traffic patterns are, and they say something the equivalent to the Jiffy Lube oil change, but they say, "Hey, did you know, they're having a sale at Nordstrom's.
Hmm.
And get you there and you got enough time on your calendar to do it, to be honest." And Nordstrom's has the ability to buy that from an advertising standpoint from
Yes.
from whoever it is. I think so those miles are really cheap to get Joe into the store because Joe doesn't go to the store that often.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's that stickiness. I think going back to the example I gave earlier about my ride in the Zeus vehicle, and it gave me an option to connect my Bluetooth. So there was music playing in the vehicle, and it gave me the option to connect my Bluetooth to that. And I did it, and when it basically sent me a message saying, "Okay, we're next time you jump in the another Zeus vehicle, you're going to auto connect to Bluetooth. Yeah, we got you. And you can play your music. You can do whatever you want to do. And it's going to recognize me on the next ride that I take because I made that Bluetooth connection." Scary and
it doesn't take
interesting.
much to I know it's scary, but it does take much to make us happy,
Yeah.
Not having to jack around hooking up your Bluetooth is pretty cool about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, delighting the customer. That's the whole goal. That's part of
Right.
that stickiness. Yeah. So looking at technology architecture and hardware and maybe software differentiation, you made a comment about AI a moment ago, and there's of course lots of noise, also signal, but lots of noise around autonomy and AI. What are your comments around real world impact versus kind of pie in the sky theoretical? This is what are your comments maybe to the fleet operator or at a consumer level? Where is their real world impact around the connection between autonomy and AI?
Yeah, one of the important dimensions of quote unquote AI, large language models,
Hmm.
is computational speed
Okay.
and the amount of data that can be processed, which really doesn't have anything to do with large language models. Just has to do with it's just evolving and getting faster. And what that allows to happen is things like autonomy, things like vehicles getting safer. So I think real world applications, you're going to see vehicles are going to just get more and more safe because they're not going to let you make dumb decisions and they're going to protect you from yourself.
Mm,
Number one reason there's fatalities have gone up in the US, even though cars have gotten safer, is because of texting.
mm,
So how the vehicle interacts with that capability to text will be interesting to see how that evolves. That's one practical example. I think safer vehicles. I think that autonomy is going to come quicker because I think we're going to be able to get closer to what it takes to really drive a vehicle. I still think humans are better drivers than autonomous vehicles just because our brains are beautiful things and
Mhm.
we can take so just pull up to a traffic light. There's so much going on in your brain and you're talking on the phone and drinking coffee, but you understand how to get through that to an autonomous vehicle. That's a really complicated thing to do. But as cognitive speed and the ability to process lots of data, and they never sleep, so it's constantly getting better. I think we'll see better autonomy. And then just decision tools, how we help both consumers and fleet owners make better decisions about when, how, where to repair their vehicles is going to be important. One of the things you put in your email to me was around routing
Mm.
and the efficiency gains there. I think that's classic problem for a large language model to satisfy. People are still going to have to turn wrenches. People are still going to have to clean vehicles. There's still a physical dimension to what makes transportation go, but I think in the near term we're using it. I think a lot of other companies are. So it's not a matter of is the sort of end all be all for this next chapter. It's just like another tool in the tool chest.
When you were talking about just the cognitive power of the human that pulls up to the intersection, there's a phone call underway, there's a coffee in hand, there's four people that need to go, and yet you just understand. You don't think about it. You just know when it's your
Right.
turn to go because
Right.
your brain categorized who got there first and who moved next. You know where your place is in line. And so the machine learning, of course, has to understand all that and work through that. I remember a conversation I was having with someone, it's probably been about 8 or 9 years ago when we were talking about the future of autonomy. And specifically, it was within the context of EVs with autonomous feature. And it's like, the knee jerk reaction, the Luddite reaction is I'll never let a vehicle determine if I'm going to live or die, in a vehicle situation. And and I countered, I was like, well, the car's probably not going to be going 20 miles over the speed limit anyways. It's going to be
Right.
traveling within the bounds of expected transportation guidelines and the lines on the road and the speed limit and the weather conditions, and all that. It's going to be factored in versus you just flying 30 miles over the speed limit through an intersection. So it's probably going to take better care of you than you are. Maybe once it learns, it's got to learn, but it's going to eventually be pointed in that direction.
I guess I'm with the Luddites a little bit. I'm not getting on it. I'm not getting in an autonomous vehicle and be going out on 285 here in Atlanta on a Friday night. That's just not happening.
Yeah.
I don't care how good the technology is right now. There is just way too much going on. Now, do I take it, a local route, to and from work if I'm not on any big freeway? Sure, because it's like you said, you're going 35, 45. Most people, you're not 50 miles over the speed limit.
Yeah. Your earlier comment about your grandfather hearing this conversation, it makes me think of vehicle ownership. I'm kind of on the other end of the spectrum. I'm ready to retire from driving. I've since already somewhat for the most part abandoned the dealership model of going to a dealer and buying a vehicle. I haven't, last four vehicles, maybe five vehicles were not purchased from a dealership. It was either wholesale or the Carvana experience just because got
Uh-huh.
burned out in the whole dealership model. And so, but even beyond that, beyond the acquisition piece of an automobile, to your earlier comments about the insurance, the total cost of ownership, the depreciation, the fact that the vehicle's parked over 90% of its time in the driveway and not moving. For me, I'm ready to kind of retire from automobile ownership. I'm ready to outsource that to autonomy. And I live in I don't live in as big a metro city as you do. I'm in San Antonio, Texas, and Waymo is practicing routes and developing route strategies here, and I'm sure they'll show up to market very, very soon. And it doesn't mean I'm gonna go sell all my vehicles and get out of it, but I probably will be
Right.
looking to move to reduce vehicle quantity in my household just by
Yeah.
leveraging stuff like.
And back to the use case is determining what transportation mode you need. I think for our aging baby boomers that are living longer, autonomy is going to be, it's going to it's going to allow them to have a more vibrant life because they're not going to be, they're not going to be limited to whether they can drive or not. So I think we don't even know what the implications, long-term implication, positive implications are. For the middle crew, I don't know. I mean, everybody, are we all going to want to have access to at least one vehicle? 24 hours a day. George family
Yeah.
will. I mean, I'm like you, I'm on the other end of that spectrum. But then you think about our kids today or their kids, my grandchildren, I don't know what transportation looks like 10 years from now when my 5-year-old granddaughter thinks about a license, or do they even have driver's licenses anymore?
Yeah, two important call outs that you just made. One is the need to retain a vehicle in the sense of like that example you made earlier. If a sick child, 3 a.m., you don't want to wait for Waymo. You want to get in the car and you want to go right now. And
Right.
get them taken care of. And then to your point, I mean, Gen Z is a prime example of this, especially the younger Gen Z. There is an obvious disinterest in vehicle ownership, driver's license. I think of Gen Zers I personally know that either don't have a driver's license or maybe they do, but they don't own a vehicle and they don't have an interest in owning a vehicle. They don't have an interest in, and it's like, I'm thinking I was learning to drive at 13, 14, got my permit at 15, was in my truck on the day I got my driver's license
Yeah.
and I was
It was
gone.
freedom,
It was
right?
freedom.
Yeah.
I'm gone. I'm out of here,
Now they're all talking to each other 24 hours a day, so they don't need that from you.
Right.
So
Technology has brought them together. It brought us all together.
now this is turning into the crusty old guy podcast.
That's okay. This is an important
That's right.
conversation.
I'm going to own it.
No, yeah, I'm tracking right along with you, Joe. This is a good
Yeah.
conversation, and I've appreciated your insights and your commentary so far. It's been very good, and I'd like to kind of get into as we get ready to land this plane here. I'd like to look at some future outlook and maybe what your view is on what the market, who in the market's going to be determined as the winner. If you ignore hype cycles and you focus on execution, what as an operator or consumer, you can answer this either way or both. What capabilities will separate those that win from those that don't in this emerging technology and this shift in transportation over the next 5 to 10 years? What's that going to look like?
Yeah, I think on the consumer side, who makes many of the use cases consumers have more cost effective, and so shopping, digital commerce is a prime example. But that's a really big, complicated problem because you can't keep running inefficiently in how things are delivered and have the business make money. So there's got to be some give and take there. I think the ability to optimize routing, change the economics with the consumer based on, can you wait till Friday? If you do, you have this much discount.
Mm,
So I think there'll be some evolution there. So whoever's smart about making it easier and can demonstrate an efficiency, consumer side will win. On the fleet side and the vehicle side, it's relatively the same. But do fleets have to follow the traditional model of ownership, or do you get into more of a lease or use based for fleet operators themselves, and you have pools of vehicles that they can draw from? Think about the future of Uber or the future of Lyft.
mm,
Are they in commercial fleets the same way they're in moving
mm,
consumers? And you see Uber Freight, you see Uber Eats.
mm,
So they're starting to move out into different use cases. So I think companies like those that facilitate the transaction, and I absolutely think that's where Google's going too. So I think that Chinese manufacturers are going to be a big part of the next 10 years just because of cost effectiveness and electrification and the quality of the products they're building. American consumers are going to get what they want, and they want more affordable vehicles.
mm.
And if they're electric and they're Chinese, I don't think that's going to
Make,
stop it from happening. I think we're going to start to go up with vertical takeoff and landing.
mm,
Um, more and more. I think it'll, like everything, it's going to come unevenly. Maybe the best way to deliver packages into Manhattan is land on the rooftops and distribute it down versus trying to double park and drive pallets full of boxes into those big cities. Consumer travel as vertical, VTOL, it happens today in
mhm,
the form of a helicopter. Question is, how does that evolve? Where does it evolve? How is that integrated into the overall transportation system?
mm.
So it's a pretty broad question, so I tried to hit the most interesting.
Yeah, no, and I'm for sure. I'm sure those listening, you took them down numerous thought tracks with that. So that's a good response and good comments. Joe, thanks for being on Field Frequency. For those that want to connect with you directly, learn more about what Cox Automotive is doing, what's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, joe.george at coxautoinc.com.
Very good.
It's probably the best. I'm old fashioned. I don't even know what my LinkedIn name is, so that I'm on LinkedIn. So, but I don't even know what the name is.
No.
So joe.george@coxautoinc.com.
Great. Well, Joe, thanks for coming on the show. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
That's great. Really appreciate it.
This episode was produced and edited by the team at Autozy. To find out more, visit autozy.co, AUTOZY.co.